So those are the broad strokes of what I gathered from the Harvard report. What are your thoughts on those findings, Jay?
Well, first, I want to make sure I got my numbers right. Should have checked earlier, but yeah, that $30 billion figure for the endowment, yeah, it's actually 53.2.
Oh,
which is crazy growth because their endowment was 30 not that long ago.
Right.
Student body is actually now 19,218 due to having 14,000 postgrad students. So it just reflects even more of this, again, the impact of having this much wealth to start with before slavery finally ends and there's no way to make any more money off of it. But if you have all of this money at that point in time, at the beginning of the 1900s, then the beginning of the 20th century, as we move into the Industrial Revolution, as we move into technology and everything, you are going to make so much more fucking money. And then you have that continued virtuous cycle of rich people coming to your school, getting indoctrinated on believing that everything that they've done up until now is totally fine.
Indoctrinated is the right word.
Yeah. And then they go forth, they're successful, and they donate back.
Right. And the cycle continued.
And it just continued and continued and continued. And thank you for also putting into the broader historical context of the fact that there weren't that many universities back then. And almost all of them were startups that failed. Put them in the context of like companies.
Right.
Several of these startup universities, in air quotes, failed. And it wasn't
the ones involved in the slave trade
making a fuck ton of money with slavery that they actually had enough money to keep these universities going.
Yes. And that's exactly what the findings say, is that basically the funding from slavery is what kept these universities going when others failed and gave them the money to remain elite for decades to come. There is nothing that will pay you more than free labor.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. And I hate the idea of, it's kind of like indentured servitude because they could, and indentured servitude is also fucked up. But because they're getting a free place to live and free food or whatever. Dude, they got shitty. They lived in absolute squalor. Okay, mm-hmm. They were given
the living conditions were horrible. Yeah, they were horrible because the rich wanted to make sure that indentured slaves didn't get too comfortable.
Yeah,
so they didn't want them staying long in those conditions. So they made it. It's almost similar to homeless shelters. They make it unlivable so that you won't stay there because they do not want to apply their resources to it. It's a waste.
Yeah. Yeah. And then your actual slaves, they're living in absolute squalor and they're getting literally the worst food, which is why even still today, things like chitlins are considered like African-American cuisine when that was literally just the pig intestines that the white folks would not use when they ate. And so here, we're not going to use this, it's already pig. All right. We're going to take the meat. You can have the intestines because we're not going to eat it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So let's not pretend like there was some kind of benevolence with slavery because they're getting a free place to live. And
right. And it wasn't free.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't free.
It wasn't free. And
you
also,
they weren't allowed to
leave ever. They did not make the choice to begin this type of arrangement, to put it in its most, positive sense. And they were never allowed to leave. And then their families were broken up and they were punished brutally for the slightest fuck ups. Even it shouldn't even say fuck up. They were punished brutally at the whim of these of their masters, and they didn't need a fucking reason.
It's absolutely true. And the punishments were so egregious to make sure that uprisings and escapees were at a minimal that they decapitated people. They hung their heads publicly on spears. They lynched them. They burnt them alive. They raped them, some of them publicly, to humiliate them, particularly some of the Black men, so that they would not be respected as men in front of their families. Let me tell you something. You can talk to me about forgiveness until the cows come home. I will never fucking forgive these people. That's what the people who are in the business of forgiveness are in the business of doing. They can go right ahead and forgive whoever they need to forgive. I don't forgive these people. This was calculated. This was meaningful. This was thoughtful. This was mindful. There was absolutely no doubt in their minds that we were not to be successful, that we were not to be seen as equal, that we were not to be seen as human. And honestly, I think we're out. It's mental illness to think that we're ever going to change the minds of these people. I'm done with the marching. You will very rarely catch me at a march going forward. The only thing that makes for meaningful change in our communities is economic self-sufficiency. once you're able to make money for yourself without relying on any of these people, then we've got a chance. We can't be protesting the same people we're sending our resumes to. It's schizophrenic on both parts. And it doesn't force any of these institutions to have to change any of their ways, because at the end of the day, they know we're coming to them for our bread and butter. If we remove ourselves from the equation and create our own economy enough to impact theirs, now we've got some power. Until that moment comes, for me personally, everything else is supplemental and arguably performative.
I do agree with you there that a lot of this shit is very much performative. I think there's interesting rhyme, how history repeats, it rhymes. There's some interesting poetry, if you will, to the fact that the first Black president came from this university and literally, like, without having a degree from Harvard, he would not have been able to be president, without having been a successful, student at Harvard Law, and also, being, the first Black person to be the editor of the Harvard Law Review. He wouldn't have been
Correct.
He would not have been thought of as worthy.
But there are some fundamental facts that we all need to know. And so for that alone, I appreciate Harvard releasing the report, because at least it validates from an institution the people who don't understand these issues respect. At least it's coming from a voice they're willing to listen to.
Exactly, because like this is coming on the heels of the 1619 project, where many people tried to say, oh, well, the 1619 project, you're just trying to insert race into everything. Because for people who don't know, the 1619 project is about trying to look at how the legacy of slavery and how, not even the legacy, how slavery itself shows up throughout American history, both directly and indirectly, because literally the first slave ship that showed up here was in 1619. Okay. 1776 was still a long ways away.
Right.
You know what I mean?
A long ways away.
Yeah. And so it's at the foundation, and people, and it was written by a Black woman. And so people say, oh, well, you're just out to get the whites. And people try to dismiss that. So it's good to see a school that, like it or love it, Harvard still has the name. Harvard is still Harvard. Right. So to see Harvard put this out in the name of truth, in the name of Veritas, which is their motto. That
is their motto, which is supposed to be transparency and truth.
Right. It supports what was done with the 1619 project. It's cool to see that Brown was the first one to put this out, because a lot of idiots think of Brown, even though it is an Ivy League school, they think, oh, well, you go to Brown if you didn't get into Harvard or whatever. Or Brown is where, like East Coast hippies go.
Right, right. I mean? True.
So it's cool to see that they did this first, because Brown is still an excellent university with a very long reputation. Brown is also, almost as old as Harvard. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? So it'll be interesting to see if many more Ivy League schools do this. I think if Harvard does it, Yale's got to do it. And if Yale does it, then Princeton's got to do it. But the thing is, I think Princeton probably has just as fucked up a past with this, if not more.
Absolutely, because Princeton attracted the Scots. And like I mentioned before, it was a group of Scottish men from the South that started the Ku Klux Klan at the heels of the loss of the Civil War. So there was a huge connection between the Scottish scholars, the racism that was bled into the curriculum, multi-curriculum, right? The medical curriculum, the law curriculum, the economic curriculum. I mean, remember, part of the reason business schools were built was because the industry of textile and merchandising was exploding. And why was it exploding? Because picking cotton had become the primary export for the colonies back and, bleeding off the backs of the plantations in the Caribbean and in the South, which was what were the primary exports? Tobacco. Cotton, I believe, was number one.
Cotton, tobacco. Yeah. International market for all of those things.
And Black bodies. Mm-hmm. Right. So they needed a justification for keeping imagine how rich you would be if every day you had 100 people who just walked through the door and handed you bags of money.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't we all be rich?
And you handed them nothing.
And how Harvard actively participated in maintaining that by shaping the world and how people understood slavery through the curriculum of economics, medicine,
with literally
law, and science.
Seminary.
Absolutely.
Beginning with religion.
Right. So I applaud Harvard releasing these findings. Thank you for being honest. And at the same time, fuck you. I won't forgive it. I have no forgiveness in my heart for these people. I mean, I agree with Chris Rock when I think they asked him if he watches slave movies and he says no, because they never really truly show you the horrors of what we went through. And we'll never truly understand the horrors of Black people being taken from their countries and put in a public zoo for people to study. You know, I'm not going to forgive this, because the whole time that these people were doing this, they were praying to the same Jesus they keep talking to us about. So I can't believe that those people know anything about the difference between right and wrong. And the more we study it, the more we understand that they actively participated in keeping this going. This wasn't something that people were like, well, you know, I don't really know if I like this, but my neighbors do it, and this is just what we know. No, these people knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing, and they didn't care because they were making money. And that's fine. But knowing that, we have a responsibility ourselves as a group to take that same knowledge and accept these people for who and what they are, what they have shown us they are. I'm not going to look at people who have acted like this for 400 years and genuinely believe in my heart of hearts that they really want to see us as equals and share the wealth. I have no reason to believe that. There is no evidence to support that at this point.
And frankly, y'all just now got to that point of even saying those words about equality and shit like that. You know, you've got 400 years of Americans acting a certain way, and then you have at absolute most a 40 or 50-year history of white Americans saying, hey, maybe this isn't so good. Maybe we should let the Negroes have a little, equality and shit.
And that's fine.
Every single aspect, every single time, even the smallest bit of progress was made, it's always been met with an immediate pushback from so
What did I tell you? We got Kamala and Ketanji, so we lost Will and Jada. There is always a sacrifice.
Re-emphasize the fact that slavery ended in Massachusetts in 1780 something, 1783?
Right. But Harvard was like, well, we'll have no part of that.
Yeah, no more slavery in Massachusetts, but Harvard and all these people are still making money off of slavery and using that money to grow Harvard. Okay, so they get to pat themselves on the back.
Right. And Harvard waited till the last minute to have to stop being. It's not like as soon as the law came out, they were like, no more. I mean, like they waited to like the last second of the last moment of when they could and could not do this and continued.
Right. Now, did they actually have slaves working at the school?
They worked on the campus.
There it is. And because it was Harvard, it's not like you could. So Massachusetts says no more slavery.
Owned.
If Harvard still has slaves after Massachusetts says there's no more slavery, do you think someone can call the cops and call the cops on Harvard to go, hey,
you can't, because it's the richest.
That's illegal now.
Well, it's the richest families that are funding Harvard. So they own the law enforcement, who at that time are just overseers.
Nobody's gonna come in there and tell the slaves on the Harvard campus that they're free in 1783.
Yeah, and no one's gonna send them a letter, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to read it. So,
did we hear you Negroes were trying to learn how to read? They just kill you for that.
Right, for learning the alphabet, you could die.
Yeah, and
then you wonder why several generations later, education's not important to certain communities, and it's because they've had to learn to survive without it.
The fuck.
This ain't complicated.
And what's interesting to me is even when they finally get rid of the last slave, and that's the other thing. You say they waited till the last minute. I'm pretty sure they still had, some, maybe they didn't have them working on the Harvard campus, but some of the dean of Harvard or a professor or whatever, they probably still had slaves.
They had those motherfuckers still emptying the garbage cans. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah. And then beyond that, they're all still making money off of slavery.
Everybody's making
for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
They're all still making money off slavery. The endowment's still making money off of slavery. People and they're accepting donations from people that are making money off of slavery, even though slavery is no longer legal in Massachusetts. We all get to pat ourselves on the back.
Yes. And I think that attitude carries to this day. I mean, the most progressive cities the ones that claim to be progressive, like the San Franciscos, like the New Yorks, like the Chicagos, at the same time have the largest divide in land ownership and wealth between whites and blacks. While they're preaching progress, they're not demonstrating it in their daily life. The real estate divide, the wealth divide is larger in the progressive states than anywhere else. San Francisco, how much is a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco? $4,000 at this point. You're telling me that pricing is for who? The marginalized groups? Who do you think lives there? people who are making that income and their colleagues. So you may not have actively divided yourself by race, but you did it economically, which is race anyway, because economically, you will only allow your counterparts into those roles anyway, so that they get those salaries where they can afford to live next to you. That's the whole point.
And we can have a whole separate conversation about redlining, where Black folks who had sufficient means, who had sufficient credit, still were only allowed to buy homes in certain places. And then in those places, the government did not guarantee the loans, but everywhere else, the government guaranteed the mortgage loans. So that means the price of your house is going to go up because all these loans are federally guaranteed, so that we can incentivize home ownership. But in these Black neighborhoods, the price is going to stay low. It's going to be depressed even relatively, because the government isn't guaranteeing the mortgages for homes in these neighborhoods specifically. You're literally putting a cap on wealth with Black people, and you're literally injecting steroids into wealth in white neighborhoods.
Right. I mean, this is a discussion that people who are proponents of true American history, or what has been hijacked as critical race theory, these are the conversations that they're asking us to have. It's not about saying who did what and pointing fingers. It's just looking at history and understanding how race bleeds into all the fabrics of it. Every country does that. I mean, Germany studies the Nazis. They don't act like it never happened. They study it so that we can understand why this is like not something we should really be doing. So the conversations are important. Having the conversations are important. Critically thinking about them is important. And again, like I said, I applaud Harvard for releasing their findings. I applaud Brown for releasing its findings. And at the same time, fuck them. They should just let every Black student in for free, to the outrage of everyone, I'm sure. But I mean, until they make active change, what difference does there even really make about this report? There is a family suing Harvard right now, an African-American family that's suing them because Harvard has photographs of one of their ancestors who was a slave, and Harvard owns the photographs and the family wants them. And Harvard has not given the family the photographs, and the lawsuit continues. So even though Harvard has the findings, it hasn't moved the needle on action.
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, fuck you, Harvard. But thanks for the report. It made for good reading.